I promised our audience that we would talk about Bill Gates before we get you out of here, Whitney, which is troubling. Over the past couple of months, Bill Gates has gone to Mar-a-Lago, had a 3-hour dinner with President Trump. The Wall Street Journal did a glowing sort of wet kiss rebranding interview, an article the other day. We featured it extensively here on our show. And of course, the Wall Street Journal went after us for a copyright strike in violation, of course. But anyway, nevertheless, it was a big wet kiss for Bill Gates. There seems to be a rebranding happening, not only with like Mark Zuckerberg, but Bill Gates. What do you make of this? And he sort of just sloughed off. They didn't really push him on Jeffrey Epstein at all. It was just sort of a,
They haven't in a while, haven't they?
No. What do you make of all this?
Well, I think it's quite clear that a lot of the big tech oligarchs feel like this is going to be a golden age for them specifically. I think it was pretty telling that at the recent inauguration, a lot of them had front row seats, including those that had been very antagonistic to Trump in previous years, like Jeff Bezos in particular, who, owns the Washington Post, which was one of the most, vocal mainstream media outlets that was, very vocally against Trump. So the fact that they're sort of being welcomed back with open arms is quite interesting. But I think, as I've argued for a few years in my work, Silicon Valley and the national security state have essentially fused. You could argue that these big tech oligarchs have more influence over our government than any elected politician because of how dependent the government is on them for their services, whether that's Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, or any of these other companies that are becoming increasingly entangled with the U.S. government, like Palantir that I mentioned earlier. A lot of the essential functions of the government are dependent on these big tech companies now, and they, are trying to, I think, push for a new era of quote unquote innovation and things like AI and things like that, but that would necessarily necessitate greater AI adoption. And so, some of these entities that developed the AI roadmap for the United States, like the National Security Commission on AI, was saying in 2019 that, in-person shopping needs to be eliminated. Facial recognition needs to be more widespread on American streets. Basically, we have to forcibly expand the user base for all of this AI technology. And the best way to do that is through government policy. And so a lot of these announcements, for example, with Stargate and their AI data centers, the teaming up of, OpenAI now becoming a major government contractor, and, Sam Altman saying we need to rewrite the social contract as a consequence of the impacts AI will have on society, and things of that nature. And how Palantir is basically becoming one of the AI engines on which, society, not just the public sector, but also a lot of the private sector is now running. A lot of these oligarchs have outsized influence on our world, and maybe Bill Gates isn't chairman of Microsoft anymore, but he certainly has a lot of influence in the big tech scene. He's a major investor in a lot of infrastructure companies through his various investment firms, and a lot of those investments, of course, had been made in biotechnology. He made a massive amount of money off of vaccines, particularly in the COVID era. The U.S. government has never stopped funding one of his brain children, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. We give them billions and billions of dollars, and have ever since they were created. And they're one of the biggest funders of the World Health Organization, for example. So even though Trump exited from the WHO, we are still funding, organizations that partner with the WHO and fund the WHO. Bill Gates funds the WHO, I'm pretty sure, directly as an individual through his foundation.
Yes,
and so
does,
sort of cozying up to him. Yeah. So I think cozying up to him, is problematic in a lot of ways. And the fact that he, in particular, was so enthusiastic after his conversation with Trump about how there would be some sort of acceleration of vaccine innovation, similar to what happened in 2020, which is presumably a reference to Operation Warp Speed and the emergency use authorization paradigm. I would argue that seems to be Bill Gates signaling that there's enthusiasm on the part of the current administration to allow a lot of these mRNA products onto the market. But as we knew during COVID, and also as is still apparent, a lot of these mRNA products under the current regulatory paradigm cannot even make it through animal trials. So there would have to be a great reduction in the rigor of clinical testing, which is already arguably ridden with conflicts of interest depending on the contractor doing that testing. And you could argue that some of those tests aren't rigorous enough, or there's also a revolving door with, those agencies and big pharma, things like that. I think, people need to be very concerned about mRNA technology, and that we shouldn't necessarily be hoping that the government, even with this administration, will save us from it. I think the best we can probably, or something we can probably push for and hopefully get, is that products with mRNA in them, whether that's livestock, meat from livestock injected with mRNA, or other products that have mRNA, are labeled as containing genetic material so people can make informed consent. But I think it's pretty clear that this administration plans to allow those products onto the market, and not to really push for them to be removed or to have them undergo more rigorous testing. It seems to be quite the opposite. And this is actually, unfortunately, consistent with things that happened with Trump's first term, not necessarily, well, of course it happened with pharmaceuticals under the guise of COVID-19, but also the biotech industry was dramatically deregulated in agriculture, and genetic modified organisms had it was a huge market swing in the upwards direction for them under Trump. And actually a lot of organic farmer associations and small farmer associations sued the first Trump administration because of that extreme deregulation of GMOs in the food supply. So, it seems like, at least as far as President Trump is concerned, he doesn't see these, genetically engineered products, whether in the food supply or in the healthcare system, as concerning. And I think, people have sort of tried to explain away his support for the vaccines produced in Operation Warp Speed, and say he doesn't necessarily feel that way. But I think we should pay attention to his own words. And he's continued to sort of, praise it as a great accomplishment. And hasn't really said anything about mRNA needs to be studied, or we're not sure about this. It seems like he's all on board, as of course are the big business leaders in big pharma, which I know Max Jones a month or two ago was on your show to talk about the issue of big pharma and patent cliffs. Really, the only way big pharma can stay alive and continue to expand its profits, as it is wont to do, is to get biotech deregulated so it can flood the product with markets that never have to necessarily go generic and mean that loss of profit, for big pharma, because they'll be in a different category than a lot of existing drugs that are exclusive to a pharmaceutical company and then later go generic, and that creates a big profit dip for these firms. But a lot of these biotechnology things won't be subject to that, and because they're sort of running out of conventional products to market and produce that can make it through regulation, this has been the big push, and they're joined in doing so through a lot of joint ventures with some of the big tech firms, like GlaxoSmithKline, for example, has a joint venture with Google, and there's a lot of these that have been popping up over the years. So, if you have Silicon Valley having an outside influence on this administration, that could very possibly be a motivator here as well. And a lot of the big venture capital firms that are responsible for the rise of the big Silicon Valley behemoths, or have been produced from them, are among the biggest investors in the biotechnology industry. And so I think, people that are concerned about this technology need to be very focused on how these policy agendas progress, and try and do all we can to have informed consent about what products contain them, so that if you wish not to consume them, you can do so effectively.